Welcome back, all my 40k fanatics out there. Today's video is for my cronies. This weekend is the Las Vegas Open, and after that, it's going to be all Ark of Omens in the competitive scene. Since I wasn't able to attend LVO this year, that gives me a lot of time to start looking at combinations for Ark of Omens, especially with my boys, the Necrons. So with this video, I want to take you down what goes through my mind when looking at a competitive list. This is how I build the list and maybe give you guys some ideas on what you can run with Necrons in this competitive season. If you haven't subscribed yet to my channel, please do. Turn on the bell for notifications to get notified on more faction-focused videos such as this and battle reports I try and put out once a week. With all that being said, let's move over to my Necron list, which is a Novak Dynasty. The first place I want to start, the Secondaries. When building a new army for competitive play, the first place I like to go to is the Secondaries, specifically the ones that are designated for that army. When looking at the Necron Secondaries, we did get a little bit of a nerf behind Purge the Vermin and Treasure of Aeons, and Ancient Machineries not being able to be scored by vehicles. However, I don't really feel like some of these were hurt that bad to be completely unplayable. Starting off with Purge the Vermin. Purge the Vermin, you score 1 point at the end of your turn for each table quarter that does not have a unit within it, which is one of the changes, as well as score 1 victory point if there is no unit within your deployment zone. This meant that in the previous iterations of this rule, you could go first and score 4 points. So now with the new Purge the Vermin, you can't score it on the first game turn. I still think this is a solid secondary. You need to be aggressive and push your opponent out of different deployment zones, etc. But if you're able to cut the map in half and still control your deployment zone, you score 3 points on each of your turns, which will still finish almost cap it out. You just need to push back a little bit and try and get that 4th point to be able to really maximize it. For turns of scoring 3 points will get you 12. You need 2 turns more aggressive to get the full 15. A 12 on any secondary really isn't that bad, especially when you can almost guarantee 12 points on it every single game. Ancient Machineries is a secondary that requires you to control objectives. Previously, in this generation of 40k, in this edition, we had a secondary called Stranglehold, and that secondary was taken out because it was taken by too many armies and considered too strong, I guess, in a sense. Now, with Necrons, we basically have a better version of Stranglehold, where Stranglehold required you to hold more objectives than your opponent. Treasure of Aeons scores specific points based on the objectives that you hold. With many of the missions having 3 objective markers directly down the center, it's very easy to be able to hold those objective markers and score 3 points a turn, since this one scores at the end of your turn. With each one of the objective markers you hold is incrementally more points. If you hold 1 of them, you score 2 points. If you have 2 of them, you score 3 points, and the third one will give you 4 points. Previous iteration gave you 5 points if you held all 3, which is what made it very strong, as you could capitalize this in the objective secured dynasty and score it in 3 turns. Made it kind of rough, especially with Purge the Vermin. Code of Combat was removed. Code of Combat was one that I liked and I ran, and I kind of understand why they took it out, because they didn't have a cap on it. Personally, I wish Code of Combat would have stayed. Went from the current rulings of how you scored it to maximum of 4 points per turn, 3 points per kill, and remove the noble effect of a noble having to kill a character and allow it to or a unit, and allow it to be any character kills a unit. The final secondary for the Necrons that doesn't work as well for my army, but I think I'll still choose it more times than not, is Ancient Machineries. Ancient Machineries is a secondary that you complete an action, and that action is completed on an objective marker outside of your table quarter or your territory, your deployment zone, excuse me. When that objective completes, you score 4 points. If the unit completing the action is objective secured, it completes at the end of your turn. If not, it completes at the end of your next command phase. So with my army, I don't have objective secured, but I have a lot of Canoptic. And one of the other caveats for this secondary is that a Canoptic unit can perform this action. So a solo Scarab can fly back on an objective marker that's outside of my deployment zone and score 4 points by completing this secondary. I can move across the board, and whenever those opportunities arise, be able to get 4 points off of it. Because it scores 4 points every time it completes, that means even over a course of the 5-turn game, if I'm only able to successfully do this 2 times, that's still 8 points. Now, in most scenarios, if I'm able to push back against my opponent, especially with the dynasty that I've selected, which we'll be going into shortly, there is a good chance that I could have a less scarab, less unit that could pick up an ancient machineries somewhere else on the board to give me 3 for a turn and score 12 points on that. So these secondaries, while prior Necrons were looking at an easy 45 on secondaries, I still think we're looking at a very, very, very solid 36 plus on secondaries with little effort. So our secondary game is still very strong. Other secondaries I might look into for this army are engage on all fronts due to my army's speed. I've talked a lot about what these secondaries are and how they influence the picks in my list. Let's move over to my list itself and see what has influence from these secondaries. So now let's take a look at what I've come up with all this stuff with the secondaries and everything else to play competitively in Ark of Omens. The first thing to note is that I'm taking a Novak Dynasty. Many of the dynasties that were on the fringe before are starting to get looked at, one with the removal of Armor of Contempt, as well as the fact that the Eternal Conqueror's dynasty can no longer take another dynasty with it. So the objective secure dynasty is reduced, but I still think has merit in competitive play. The dynasty I chose was Novak because with Armor Contempt being gone and utilization of the Hungry Void command protocol, this means that my army for the entire game will have, when they charge, get charge, or heroic intervention, I will gain +1 strength, +1 AP, and 6s to wound will be an additional AP1. I also get +1 to all of my charges, so out of Veils and Deep Strikes, etc., I can charge on an 8 instead of a 9. The Novak Dynasty has the ability to play on objectives because of how much AP and how much strength I'm bringing when I charge. So any unit that's on an objective where the game needs, I would like to be played, can get charged by my units and hopefully picked up. Moving over to the units that I'm taking. So no spoiler here, I'm bringing 3 9-man squads of Scarabs. I mentioned them a couple of times, and they're someone that I get highlighted in a couple of my videos. Scarabs are one of my favorite units, so being able to use them in this capacity, I absolutely love. The Novak Dynasty giving them +1 strength and +1 AP on the charge, as well as the 6s to wound, gaining an additional AP. My 6s to hit, automatically wounding for at least AP1, means these guys have a lot more bite than they typically have. They're going to give up a lot of no prisoner points, being 4 wounds apiece and 9 wound models in the unit. However, Necrons usually struggle to stop giving up no prisoner points, so why fight it? Their support comes in the form of 2 units of spiders, a 3-man squad and a single spider. Both units have a single gloom prism for a little bit of psychic deny the witch on a psychic interrogation or something else, and all of them have a particle beamer. The particle beamer is an interesting weapon. On the profile for the spider, it shows that a particle beamer has 6 shots. However, if you look at what you're buying for the spider, you're actually buying 2 particle beamers. So each one of these guys has 12 shots, meaning the squad would have 36 shots. They have support relying around the characters to be able to get up to a ballistic skill 3, which we'll get to in a second, meaning that these guys can fire off 36 shots, their core, so my will be done can hit, or veiled across the field to blast a unit in the backfield. The guns are only AP 0, but sometimes it's best just to make your opponent roll dice, and eventually they'll roll 1s or whatever failed saves you need them to roll. The other unit choice that I'm selecting is Wraiths. I have 2 squads of Wraiths, a 5-man and a 4-man. The 5-man is with the claws to give me some 2 damage to be able to rip apart a little bit of higher wound targets. The Wraiths inherently have a weapon skill of 4, but I have ways to buff that to a 3, and with all of the Novak buffs, they're able to hit really, really hard and get through some of the hardest of armor. The other squad is a 4-man squad with whip coils, with, again, some of the Novak buffs that we're going to talk about shortly, as well as the fact of being able to double attacks. These guys could shred through infantry really quick with a high volume of attacks. They initially have an AP1 on their whip coils and are a strength 4. On the charge, these guys will be looking at strength 5, AP2, and doubling their attacks, which is going to be important in a second when we go over the Novak stratagem. Moving over to my character support, I have 2 Chronomancers because I want to be able to maintain a 5-up invuln on my Scarabs moving across the field. A key kicker with this list is that I have an invuln on almost everything whenever it's revealed in the game. I can hide a Scarab squad and use it across a safer point of the map, and the only Scarabs that are presented are both under a Chronomancer 5-up. The Chronomancers are quick, they have a better move with the base 8-inch move, and can go over and hang out on objectives, provide a little bit of deep strike prevention so that my opponent can't get units behind me, and still complete and hold objective markers to score points later in the game. Moving over to my Overlord. My Overlord, and this is the first time I'm ever doing this, is actually a Ferion. I spent the 2 command points pre-game to give him the Ferion upgrade so that he is able to use 2 My Will Be Dones. The reason for this is so that he's able to target both of the squads of Wraiths and keep both the squads of Wraiths on a weapon skill and ballistic skill, weapon skill being more important, of a 3-up. He has a Resurrection Orb, because why not? Resurrection Orb is one of the coolest items we have. It is not the relic, it is just the basic Resurrection Orb, but I think that's fine to be able to pick up 1 Wraith in a squad and then move over to the Technomancer to heal another. And there it is, spoiler alert, the last is a Technomancer, and he is buffed to the T. First, I bought the Cryptek Arcanum for Failsafe Overcharge. Failsafe Overcharge allows me to target 1 Canoptic unit and give them +1 attack. If the unit is a monster or vehicle, it gets +D3 attacks. So, if he targets the spiders, which start with a base 6 attacks, he can get, start with a base 5 attacks, he can give them +D3 attacks. If he targets the scarabs, that's a 9-man unit with 4 attacks apiece, now going up to 5 attacks. If he targets the wraiths, they get +1. If he targets the wraiths with whip coils, they would get +1 attack. Mind you, if you have your codex handy, take a look at the whip coil and how it reads. The whip coil doubles your attacks, the number of attacks that you make with this weapon. Meaning every time you nominate that one of your attacks is going to use this, you get 1 additional attack. The Technomancer, in his first ability to add the attack off the Failsafe Overcharge, increases your attack characteristic. So the wraiths that have 4 attacks now go up to 5. There's a single stratagem that I've been alluding to out of Novak, that for 1 command point, a Novak Dynasty unit can get +1 attack. If this is used on the wraiths with whip coils, it will give them an additional attack to their profile, taking them from 4 attacks to 5 attacks. Failsafe Overcharge will take them to 6 attacks, and then they can use their whip coils to have 12 attacks apiece off of each of the guys. It's a lot of attacks coming off them, hitting on 3s, at potentially strength 5 and AP 2. It'll really shred through a lot of more well-armored infantry that the whip coils are not usually going to cut through. Last of my characters, or last of my monsters, whichever way you want to look at it, is the big mean tag team of the Necron Dynasty. I will be bringing the C'tan Shards of the Nightbringer and the Void Dragon. Reason why I chose these 2 is I said if I'm going to use C'tans, I'm taking the biggest, meanest, and the baddest. Also, they kind of do synergize well together, since they are both very big, very mean, and very bad. It's difficult for your opponent to make decisions on which one they're going to hit. If one of them survives and gets through, and has a high wound count and is able to get to your opponent's army, they can usually wreak havoc and devastate. Typically, most players I've played against go after the Nightbringer first, but some heavier vehicle armies that we might see in this meta might fear the Nightbringer healing and getting to a point of being unkillable. Both of which I'm still kind of messing with their loadouts for their C'tan powers. Right now I have the Void Dragon with Sky of Falling Stars and his personal power, and then the Nightbringer has Gaze of Death, as well as Antimatter Meteor. I can then, at the beginning of my command phase, spend a command point to drop the Antimatter Meteor for Sky of Falling Stars, which is usually the popular choice, but that's going to come down to a read of the table and what I'm facing off with my opponent. I can also drop Gaze of Death if I wish to keep Antimatter Meteor, and I can also drop the Void Dragon's anti-vehicle related power for antimatter meteor or something else if I'm going into a pure infantry build with no vehicle support that I can hit it with. So, to wrap up all the combinations and everything that's going on with my army, there's two things that I forgot to mention during the description of my army. I am spending 2 command points, one of which on the Necron specific stratagem that allows me to take a warlord trait on someone not my warlord, since the overlord is required to be my warlord, and the second is for a relic. The relic is going to be Veil of Darkness, because it almost feels like a never leave home without it. For 1 command point, at some point in the game, you pick up a core unit and put them back down 9 inches away from the enemy. It's such a good relic. It's basically in every list I've ever made, even if I don't have a dedicated Veil unit, such as this list, I still have it in there because it's a great tool at any cost. And then the warlord trait I'm taking is Thrall to the Silent King, which increases the range of all auras by 3 inches. This means that my Technomancer, who also has the Canoptic Control node, can give +1 to hit aura at 9 inches instead of 6 inches around him to Canoptic units. And this helps since all the Canoptic units are weapon skill and ballistic skill of 4+. So he is a crucial part to this army. He can repair wraiths. He can put a wraith back into the squad, and he also can heal them. The Overlord has the Resurrection Orb. A typical time what I will do with the wraiths is if I get down to 1 left, I fall it back to the Overlord. Overlord pops the Resurrection Orb. Now I heal 1 or 2 wraiths out of the squad. I put the wraith back and I put him back closer to the enemy to go back in the direction that I want to go. Now I use the Technomancer to place 1 wraith back in that failed to reanimate off the orb. That wraith will go closer to the enemy. Now when we go to the combat step, I'm able to charge this unit that fell back because it grew further out there within 2-inch coherency and these large, I believe that's a 50-millimeter base, a larger base. That's a distance that you can pick back up, especially later in the game when you would use a Resurrection Orb. You're not going to use a Resurrection Orb. Hopefully you're not going to use a Resurrection Orb on turn 1. I have had to do that before, and that's usually a scary situation, but hopefully you don't have to. Hopefully you can hide and be well protected. A lot of Necron units have a lot of versatility of moves, so it's really easy for us to take advantage of terrain and table space. The Novak Dynasty has a single CP strat that gives a unit +1 attack. This is super valuable because, first of all, it's any Novak Dynasty unit. This means that my Scarabs can get +1 attack. The Wraiths, the Spiders, all of these units have access to +1 attack for 1 command point. That also includes my Chronomancers with Staff of Aeons. And it is kind of funny when you go into a smaller character like an Eldar Warlock and use a command point to give your Chronomancer a 2nd attack with that Aeon Stave to try and no-invuln pop that Warlock in the head. So I like having access to that across the field. With the fact that my Wraiths are core, I also have access to Dispersion Field for +1 strength. A lot of the build of this army allows me to manipulate my stat characteristics as I see fit across the field. I can remove cover. I can reroll armor saves as need to off base cover, off base stratagems, which is a basic one. I can increase my strength as need be with my charges as well as a stratagem. And I'm able to increase my attack characteristic off of a simple stratagem. The traits that my characters give off increase my hit characteristic. So I'm able to really kind of mitigate what threats I'm able to bring where. In a game that focuses heavily on objective markers, and especially with some infantry builds and some people tiling away from infantry builds, being able to put this much infantry onto objectives, I feel is going to be difficult for a lot of armies to deal with. A lot of armies, such as Space Marines, are tooling out to be able to remove big target threats fast and control the board very, very quickly to hit vehicles and other strong units at a pace that the opposing player is not able to brace for those impacts. With my army, I'm able to heal off these hits, as well as the fact that I have a lot of multi-wound units that are not as expensive as some of the vehicle-based units that we're seeing other armies field. Plasma intercessors were a serious fear of mine for a while, and now that they're gone, I'm not as worried. Plasma Intercessors being able to 2 hits to pop a Scarab hurts and kind of throws off one of the nice things about Scarabs, them being 4 wounds, and able to soak up things like 3 damage and cause 2 hits to have to kill them as opposed to 1. The Void Dragon and the Nightbringer are my just big heavy hitters. There really is a lack of perfect damage weapons. What I mean by perfect damage is weapons that can hit every single thing. Do you need infantry? Do you need vehicles? Do you need that? The Cetans kind of hit that role, where the Void Dragon is able to handle infantry and the Nightbringer can just clear about anything in the game. They both kind of work off each other well to be able to handle those threats that people are investing more of their army by and some key combo pieces, or even threaten those key combo pieces from being able to progress across the field because of the fear of the Nightbringer coming in and slapping their invuln and their feel no pains right off of them. I did think about taking the Transcendent because of the points and try and go cheaper, but I felt like no matter what, anytime I take the Transcendent, whichever named Cetan or Catan, however you want to say it, I apologize. I hope I'm not driving someone crazy with that out there. But whichever one you choose to take is not going to be, it's not going to get ignored. The Transcendent's going to get ignored because while the Transcendent is good, there's a reason that he is 260 points versus some of the Cetans that are 300 plus. They are very, 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 very much more devastating. I know, horrible broken English, but they are so much more devastating than what a Transcendent can bring to the table, hand over hand. So I figure that's kind of the realm of if it's going to be go big or go home with those guys. I'm not running any Warriors. And I know people might be questioning, why am I not running Warriors? Well, there's 2 reasons I'm not running Warriors. 1, I hear a lot of talk about Warriors all over the internet, which means that if Warriors are the way to go, and they are the new meta pick for the Necron army, we are going to have a bunch of battle reports and a bunch of reviews on how to play Necron Warriors, and I'll double back and start working on some Necron Warrior builds. But when Necron Warrior builds were popular in this game already, number 1, they cost more points, and I understand that. But at that time, the one thing that we were getting concerned of, if you played during the beginning of this edition, was the Necron Warrior unit of 20 man getting scooped up off the field by a single unit's shooting, or picking on them a little bit to bring them into a point of 15 guys where they could get picked up off the field. One of the units that was very good at doing this, Plasma Intercessors. Okay, now we're not going to see them. But that doesn't mean the power level of the game hasn't increased drastically. Look at some of these armies. Look at Tau. Look at Votan. Look at what Space Marines are going to be bringing to the table now. There is still a lot of firepower and a lot of hard-hitting units that can pick up a squad of Necron Warriors. The support that you need to run around the Necron Warriors, while it has dropped in points, is still extra points that need to be invested into that. And in some ways, doesn't bring enough of a backbone, pun not intended, to the army versus some other units. When you start investing in Scorpex, when you start investing in Annihilation Barges or Doomsday Arcs or some Destroyers or anything else that has more hope for a damage profile, the Silent King, you're taking away points that you could be investing into the reanimation game. The Ghost Arcs, Canoptic Reanimator, mostly Ghost Arcs, Technomancer, Resurrection Orb, etc. When you don't take those units, now your Necron Warriors have less support to them to be able to do the Resurrection game. When you invest in those points to the Resurrection game, then you don't have as much of your high damage output and you're relying on those warriors to do much more heavy lifting than they're really designed to do. They can do a lot of good damage. They're a very good unit and there is a lot of play behind them. But it's going to be a very, very fine balance of how much do you dedicate to your Resurrection game without sacrificing the extra that you may need for your actual damage output for heavier, harder hitting things. An example, our Necron Warrior is going to be able to shoot down a Hekaton land fortress. Yes, there are stratagems that support being able to have 6s auto wound, but is that really a way you want to run with it and a route you want to go? Now the Silent King is going to need to be near these warriors to be able to give it full rerolls, And if you're looking at Gauze, you're going to need to be close to get your maximum shots, whether you're Gauze Reapers or Gauze Flayers. You're still going to need to be close to get enough shots to make it worthwhile. So when you're that close and you're putting that onto them and you're spending the command points and you're investing and funneling into that Necron Warrior squad to give them the reroll hits off the king, 2s to hit, and exploding 6s, and your Silent King is now up front, you better take out that Hecaton. Because if you don't take out that Hecaton, you've invested a lot behind it. The Silent King could possibly do it, but if you don't take it out, and it's going to be very difficult too, because you're looking at toughness 8, heavy hitter. I don't think they'll take him out. And then you're going to have to invest more resources to take out that Hecaton to guarantee it goes down, because if it doesn't, for one command point, that Hecaton goes back up to the top bracket, the Forge Master is going to start to heal it for 4 wounds, taking it out of the bottom bracket, even if it's at 1 wound. I've watched this happen. And it's done. That Hecaton will never die. Now, I'm not saying that the Hecaton is completely the all-in-all answer. It's just a newer answer that we've seen recently coming with the Leagues of Votann. When you look at Imperial Knights, we're in a similar fight with them as well, too. Imperial Knights can walk through and stomp all over Necrons, literally. And now, again, us trying to do that damage, when you invest everything behind that and you hit, and you do some damage to an Imperial Knight, he once again can go and fight at top bracket and come crashing into the Silent King. And if he's got that, if it's a relic gauntlet that can do 8 flat mortal wounds, and anything that fails to get to the damage step gets to re-roll, and that's coming off that Imperial Knight, your Silent King is not going to survive that. First-hand experience, Silent King will not survive that. Those are some of the things that I think about going into Ark of Omens. What do we do to answer those? Novak Dynasty allows me to increase my stat characteristics to be able to hit those things. The Wraiths start at a strength 6. They charge, they get the +1 to go to strength 7. And now I can spend 1 command point to Dispersion Shield to go up to strength 8. Now I'm able to hit the Hecaton and hurt it in combat with 2 damaged weapons. That's basically the loadouts that I'm looking for. Oh, and the C-Tans can come floating in, because if I always forget, yes, if a C-Tan touches a Hecaton, it hurts it. It hurts it very bad, and so be it, it should. That's the one thing that C-Tans are good at, is really handling some big targets. But that's basically it for my Dynasty. I've gone over the secondaries that I plan on running, giving you kind of a concept of how I look at this and going in through the builds of the army. And this is how I sit down with apps, paper, books, and go through and try and figure out what I want to run. I plan on getting this list on the table real soon. I'm not sure what hard counters I should play it against. Let me know in the comments section what you guys would want to see this Dynasty run against. Going to stick with the competitive nature, so I'll look around my area and see who I can find that plays some of those armies at a high competitive level. And we'll get them out here on the channel and we'll throw some dice. If you guys haven't subscribed to the channel already, please do. And there will be a link in the description to a Patreon below. I'm not expecting much from anybody, but I've had people say that I should set one up, so I did. And the Patreon basically is just to help fund and keep this channel, 1, as free as I can, 2, be able to continue to make content, better quality content. Right now, everything is funded out of my pocket. And the more I can get, the more I'm able to bring to the channel. I'm going to just keep funneling it into cameras and computers and everything that I can do. So if you guys want to help support me, I greatly would appreciate it. Otherwise, it's just going to take time as I learn what I need to do to make this channel even better, because this is what I want to be doing. This is where I want to be, and I really enjoy just coming on here every day that I can and talking 40K. Anyone who knows me in person knows if I call, you're in for a long phone call, and we're going to be talking about some other crazy lists that I've come up with while I was standing at work. You guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll talk to you again soon.